Hello and welcome to Murder in the UK. Today we're looking at the case of Raoul Moat from Northumberland in the UK. Moat was in prison and had written a letter to the prison authorities stating he was going to commit murder upon his release. In fact, he did. Within 3 days of being released, he'd shot his ex-partner and shot dead his ex-partner's new boyfriend. The following day, he shot at a policeman, blinding that policeman. A huge manhunt was launched in Northumberland, eventually resulting in Moat being cornered in some woodland. He then shot himself. To find out more about this case, visit www.murderuk.com or stay tuned right here for a documentary about this case. Thank you.
Just 4 weeks after a gunman had murdered 12 people in Cumbria, another deranged killer was on the loose. This time in the genteel woods and lanes of the next-door county, Northumbria.
Hello there, this is the gunman from Berkeley last night. My name is Raoul Moat. I'm coming to get you, I'm not on the run. I am coming to get you.
Armed with a sawn-off shotgun and a bag of homemade bullets, Raoul Moat murdered a man he didn't know, blinded another he'd never met, and maimed the woman he claimed to love.
Get it, you killed me. You killed me and him before that trigger was ever pulled. So you wanted me to kill myself, but I'm going to give you a chance, because I am hunting for officers now.
Moat's rampage sparked one of the biggest manhunts in British police history. But still he managed to evade capture for 7 terror-filled days, threatening that innocent members of the public would die. In a bloody final act, he dodged justice by turning his gun on himself. Durham Prison, 2010. Incarcerated among the murderers, rapists and robbers was a mountain of a man, Raoul Moat. A former bodybuilder and nightclub doorman, 37-year-old Moat was coming towards the end of an 18-week sentence for battering a young child. But Moat, a father of 5, claimed it was he who was the victim of continual police harassment.
In his mind, he was certainly being victimised. I don't think it was an official police policy to victimise Raoul, but I think that he probably did have some grievances which might have been genuine.
Inside him, he had this burning hatred of the police, and nothing could change Moat in his feelings about the police.
It was by no means a high priority offender or target for the police. It was somebody who, you know, would show up on our radar. He had been arrested something like 12 times over a 10-year period, which I would suggest isn't that excessive. But he was also known for some of his domestic dealings with former partners, domestic incidents where the police were involved.
Raoul Moat saw himself as being persecuted by the social services. He recorded hours of conversations with officials, which he believed highlighted how they were trying to destroy his life.
I've had enough of the way yous are going on. I've had enough, right? She is an absolute liar. I can prove it. Right? At no point have I raised my voice or intimidated her or mentioned where she lives or mentioned about how much money she gets, and I can prove this 100%. It's not a fuzzy recording, it's absolute crystal clarity. Special notes, social services are
Due to a number of domestic incidents, social workers considered him to pose an unpredictable and violent threat. Moat's conviction for assault on a child meant it was the first time he'd been banged up. But while he was inside, it seemed those around him took their chance to break free from his controlling influence.
They've told me he wasn't getting his kids back, and his kids mean everything to him, and then they've told him they were taking his house away, so he didn't have a home, he's lost his business, and he was being locked up.
Moat's friends say he felt his world was collapsing around him. Then Samantha Stobbart, his partner of 6 years and mother of one of his children, broke up with him while he was behind bars.
I think it needs to be pointed out they'd been living apart for quite a while, but I think in Sam's mind, She wanted a complete severance of the relationship, and him being in prison gave her that opportunity, and she took that opportunity on phone calls to remind him that the relationship was finished, it was over, it was final.
On her Facebook page, Samantha revised her relationship status to single.
Raoul Moat's relationships with women were very troubled. Every relationship he had was characterised by violence. In relation to Samantha Stobbart, in his own words, he never punched her. He slapped her, he admitted pushing her, he roughed her up, but because he never punched her, he thought that was okay.
Samantha came to my place on a few occasions when Raoul had hit her, and I would ask her not to go back, but she would always go back. He would come and pick her up and make her go back. So I was glad he was in prison, and I was glad for Samantha he was in prison, because it was her chance to break free from him and get away and move on with her life.
Knowing Moat could be violent, Samantha warned him that her new partner, Christopher Brown, was a karate instructor and was more than capable of looking after himself.
She uses terms like he's a handy lad, he'll put you on his arse, and some of her terminology is quite, you could argue it's quite inflammatory. There's no doubt that she lived in fear of Moat, and she was trying to sort of put some distance between the two, in my mind.
Apparently his cellmates, and that's saw a real change in his demeanour and the way he was. You know, he was. I mean, you're not going to be happy-go-lucky in prison, but he was, you know, he was reasonably cheerful and friendly. And when he got this phone call, he just changed. Just really, really knocked him for six.
Christopher Brown, despite his physical prowess, was a gentleman to those who knew him.
My son Christopher, he was very happy-go-lucky. He was a joy to be with. He was always making you laugh. He was just a lad enjoying life.
Christopher, how can you describe him? Very larger than life. Always laughing. I think I've seen him angry probably 5 times in our whole growing up together, and he was just, everything was funny to him. Everything.
But crucially, in a move that sent her ex ballistic, Samantha told the imprisoned Moat that her younger, fitter new boyfriend was also a police officer. She was trying to warn him off, but it was a red rag to a bull like Moat.
Samantha would have told Raoul that he was a police officer because Samantha was so scared, and she maybe would have thought that if she says that, he would leave her alone.
Given Moat's simmering hatred of the police, the thought that one of his worst enemies was with his girl pushed him to boiling point. And so, while inside, Moat ordered up a shotgun.
The evidence suggests that that was probably when the gun was procured. The phone calls used coded language like a car with 6 wheels, which I would argue was code for a gun and 6 cartridges.
On the day he came out, Moat wrote on his Facebook page, "I've lost everything. I'm not 21 and I can't rebuild my life. Watch and see what happens." And so Raoul Moat's carefully laid plan for vengeance began. That afternoon, he was seen on CCTV dressed in a bright orange t-shirt and buying camping equipment, gear he'd rely on just 36 hours later. The following day, concerned about his state of mind, prison authorities sent a report to the police saying Moat could pose a serious threat to Samantha Stobbart.
I think Raoul was mentally ill at the time. I think he'd suffered a severe breakdown. And my concern is for my brother, and I think had he been possibly rearrested or apprehended at the gates, and he'd been treated, things might have been different and this terrible cycle of events might have been prevented.
Northumbria police can't comment on the report from Durham Prison, as it's still the subject of an ongoing Independent Police Complaints Commission investigation. That same day, Moat's partner in his tree surgery business, Carl Ness, delivered the car with 6 wheels. A sawn-off shotgun with 6 cartridges.
Moat had installed CCTV at his house, and it appears that he had installed that to keep an eye on the police and gather evidence of police harassment. So for me, it just sort of further underlined his paranoia. But it's quite ironic, I suppose, that the CCTV footage that was recovered from his home address actually showed Carl Ness delivering the gun.
Now in possession of a shotgun, Moat set to work adapting its cartridges with lead fishing weights. He wanted the weapon to pack a more deadly punch.
Modifying the cartridge means that having a single projectile will possess all the energy from the shotgun, from the cartridge discharge, so that will mean that the projectile can travel further than the individual pellets, and when it strikes a target it could penetrate, to a greater depth on the body.
It's clear Moat was planning to shoot to kill. In the small hours of Saturday morning, Carl Ness drove Moat to the house where Samantha and Christopher were winding up a night in with friends. An increasingly paranoid Moat hid under the open living room window, texting his pal Ness to say those inside were laughing about him. One text message read, "I'm going to kick off nice and proper when they come out." Samantha and Christopher had no idea Moat was carrying a gun, though they were clearly worried about the threat he posed.
They decide that they're going to leave, and Chris asks, have I got a bat or anything what he can take with him just in case there's any trouble in the morning, because we didn't expect any trouble that night. I went upstairs and I got him a bar off my weight bench, and I says, there you go, and I shook his hand and I says, right, I says, I'll probably see you tomorrow night, mate. He got to the gate, and out the corner of my eye I seen somebody running across the grass, and Sam shouted, "It's Raoul," and then the first shot went off. The first shot, it was like, it was a shock. You just didn't expect it, and Sam's screaming and Chris is staggering across the grass when Raoul takes the second shot at Chris. And Chris took a few more steps and went down on the floor, and Sam by this time turned around and she was crying. She ran back into the house, and Raoul just walked up to him calmly and he nudged him in the back with a gun.
With a third shot, Raoul Moat killed Christopher Brown. But the shooting wasn't over. Moat had a clear view of Samantha in the well-lit living room. Again, he raised his shotgun and blasted her through the glass.
And there's another bang. All you hear is Sam say, "I've been shot, I've been shot." There's just blood all over the floor. There's blood on the units. She's got a hole in the arm. She was starting to turn white and her lips were turning blue. It was just absolute mayhem.
Moat ran from the scene before being caught on CCTV nonchalantly walking towards a taxi to make good his escape. The morning after murdering Christopher and maiming Samantha, he phoned a friend to brag. "I've shot Sam. I feel full of beans, like a huge cloud has been lifted from my shoulders." Father of two, Christopher Brown wasn't and never had been a police officer.
We were at a birthday party for one of the neighbours' children, and the police car pulled up and we were all laughing out the front and saying, "Oh, someone's in trouble again." And they walked over to us and just came in and he told me what happened. It was horrific. It's one of your worst nightmares. You don't ever think that you're going to have children and they're going to die. It's bad enough, God forbid they die of illness, but to die the way he died, it's horrendous.
Raoul Moat's vicious attack initially appeared to the police to be an all too common domestic grudge killing. But this was just the start. For the deluded Moat, it was payback time for all those he thought had ever wronged him. It was day one of murderer Raoul Moat's rampage. Northumbria police thought they were dealing with a tragic yet run-of-the-mill grudge shooting.
Whilst it was nasty, it was high profile, it was a relatively straightforward investigation, and the priority being finding Raoul Moat, and a lot of police forces deal with that sort of thing week in, week out.
But Raoul Moat seemed to have vanished off the face of the earth. Police made 28 arrests in an effort to track him down, without success. After dark, Moat contacted them. He made a mobile phone call, which changed everything.
Hello there, this is the gunman from Berkeley last night. My name is Raoul Moat. What I'm phoning about is to tell you exactly why I've done what I've done, right? Now, my girlfriend has been having an affair behind my back with one of your officers, this gentleman that I shot last night, the karate instructor. So the fact of the matter is, right, that she's having an affair with one of your officers. Was he not a police officer, I wouldn't have shot him. Okay. Simple as that, right? You'll get your chance to kill us, right? You'll get your chance to kill us. No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. You do want me to kill myself, but I'm going to give you a chance, because I am gone for officers now.
Tragically, this was no idle threat. Minutes after placing the call, Moat spotted a police traffic officer parked up at a key intersection on the edge of Newcastle. PC David Rathband, a married father of two, was nearing the end of his late shift. The officer had chosen his spot carefully. Experience had taught him criminals often use this route to quickly escape the city. But crucially, the police didn't know that Moat was travelling in a mate's black Lexus car. So Raoul Moat had his first police officer in his sights. The black Lexus was caught on the police car's camera, circling the roundabout.
I just stared at him. And then the next thing I remember seeing is him just standing by the window, just completely emotion. There was no emotion. He was just as if he'd frozen. And I just remember the big flash from the gun. And it just lit up the whole of my face. It was the noise then. It was just, you know, I said before, it was like my head inside a can with the largest firework. But it was worse than that. It was just unbearable, the noise. I knew I was in trouble because of the amount of blood I was losing. I just knew that I was going to bleed to death.
After being shot for a second time, in a bid to survive, PC Rathband played dead. Moat bought the sham and ran back to the black Lexus, believing he'd killed his first officer. "50 minutes later, Moat was taunting the police again.
Hello, this is Raoul, the Berkeley gunman. Are you taking this serious now? I've just downed your officer at the roundabout at the west end of Newcastle. Yes? Yeah. Well, I'm going to destroy a few lives like you've destroyed mine. This is what happens when you push and push. I'm telling you now, I'm absolutely not going to stop. You're going to have to kill me. Right. I'm never going to stop.
In Raoul Moat's own words, this was a declaration of war. He was declaring war on Northumbria police. He was convinced they'd been out to get him for all these years, and now he was out to get them.
The police ran a series of public appeals asking Moat to give himself up.
Mr. Moat, I have made a number of requests to you to contact police and hand yourself in. That opportunity still exists.
Behind the scenes, Northumbria Police's Assistant Chief Constable was in day-to-day command of the operation to find and stop Raoul Moat.
He's clearly angry, he's agitated, but he's not somebody who's lost control of his mind. This was a clear, stated intention, and that intention was to kill Northumbria police officers.
PC David Rathband survived, but paid a huge price. He's been left permanently blind. For the force, the attack on one of their officers was incendiary.
I took it as a personal attack. I'd never met PC Rathband, but he was one of my colleagues, and I've been in that position before. I've been sitting in my police vehicle on static patrol, watching what's going on round about me, and you think, yeah, that could have been me.
During the middle of the following night, Moat visited a friend's house to deliver a 40-page letter confessing to the shootings.
This letter was the innermost thoughts of a man right on the edge. He was unburdening everything about his motivation for the shootings. It was deluded and it was paranoid, but in his eyes, it was a justification for his actions.
He wrote, "The crimes I have committed are to people who have wronged me in some way."
It gave us a bit of an insight into what was making him tick. We were able to identify there was somebody here that wasn't going to be found easily, but it was somebody who was contemplating taking his own life as well.
The letter continues, "All my life I wanted death, hence the reason I took risks and made the worst kind of enemies."
It's always somebody else's fault with Moat. It's often the police's fault. Social services, it's girlfriend's fault. It's very rarely Raoul Moat's fault.
Finally, Moat threatens, "I will keep killing police until I'm dead. They've hunted me for years, now it's my turn." 24 hours later, police got a vital breakthrough that gave them a handle on just where Raoul Moat had gone to ground. The black Lexus used in the shooting of PC Rathband was spotted parked up near the picturesque Northumbrian village of Rothbury.
We went to walk our dogs and we parked beside the Lexus and just noted there was a black Lexus. Made a comment about the registration because it was unusual, and I telephoned the police.
At this point, the police had a real dilemma. They knew Moat had two men with him, Carl Ness and Kuram Awan. Ness was Moat's business partner and Awan was a friend who worked as a car mechanic. Neither man had a history of violence, and the police didn't know whether they were accomplices or being held against their will.
I've got two hostages at the minute, right?
Can you confirm we've got two hostages?
I've confirmed I've got two hostages, yes.
The hostage situation was a huge complication. Until you prove otherwise, you need to deal with them as genuine hostages, because if you don't, you're at risk of contributing to them being killed.
But the police had discovered letters from Ness and Awan written to their families. One in particular suggested they were anything but genuine captives.
It used expressions like, "I'm safer than safe." It didn't ring true for somebody who was genuinely being held against their will and genuinely fearing for their safety.
Shortly after police discovered the abandoned Lexus, Carl Ness and Kuram Awan were spotted walking down a main road near Rothbury.
The helicopter got up there very quickly and identified these two walking along the road. From the descriptions and the information and intelligence we had, it looked like it was our hostages, and I use the term carefully. We didn't know whether they were armed or not, so they had to be arrested in a safe and professional way. The only way to do that was with the armed officers.
Police used firecrackers as a distraction, and within seconds the two men were on the ground and cuffed.
I think the most frustrating part was that at that very, very point that we arrested them, I think we were probably within about 100 yards of Moat himself.
Eventually, Carl Ness and Kura Mawan were handed down life sentences for assisting Moat in his violent campaign of vengeance. But in the days to come, the police were to find themselves increasingly frustrated and under the media spotlight.
My hope, and I would have to say my expectation, was at that time we would very quickly find Moat, and it was quite disappointing that we didn't, because there was always the concern that he may have slipped a net.
Although they'd been unable to collar Moat at the same time as his accomplices, the police did find where he'd been camped out. Amongst the abandoned debris was a further vital clue to the killer's deeply disturbed state of mind.
Crucially, there was a dictaphone which Moat had spent quite a significant amount of time recording his thoughts. He started to express his dislike for the press and the media, for perceived lies, and he decided then to make some specific threats towards the general public. And it was along the lines of, for the next lie that's printed, I will shoot an innocent member of the public.
Moat had been able to monitor how the hunt for him was going, and crucially, what was being said about him. He'd grown increasingly agitated at the exposure of his troubled family relationships.
The violent and dysfunctional nature of Moat's relationships with women passed over into his relationship with children as well. There were a number of incidents which speak volumes about his manner in dealing with children. He disciplined one child by forcing her to stand in the street with a jester's hat on and a sign around her neck saying that she'd been naughty. There were reports that he had beaten to death one of the family pet dogs in front of a child. So however much he would tell people, however much he held this belief that he wanted a stable family life with women and with children and family, all of his behaviour undermined that.
Moat's own mother, who hadn't had much contact with him since his teenage years, even joined the ranks of her son's detractors. But Angus Moat tried to counter negative coverage of his brother.
I spoke to one reporter initially, just to get another side of it, Raoul, to say, look, this is out of character. You know, he's had some kind of breakdown. But I did want to get that message over that he hadn't been abandoned by his family.
But his message never got through. Acutely aware of how media interest was now at fever pitch, and that some reporting might actually be making Moat's mental state worse, the police had to get journalists on side.
We really had to sit the media down and ask for a blackout. So that we could say, look, can we just have a ceasefire in relation to the personal stories that were being printed around Moat, around relationships he had had, about accomplices, all of which clearly, in the mind of Moat, was adding to his murderous intent, and it actually added a new dimension to it, that not only was this about killing members of Northumberland Police, this was about killing the public. If you think you're dealing with something which is at the higher end of threat, you've then got to move it up tenfold.
The public were genuinely scared, make no mistake about it. People in Northumberland were very, very concerned. It was just not known where he was.
The hunt for Raoul Moat was far from over. There would be 3 more tension-filled days before its violent and bloody end.
We're now being moved back, the cordone's being moved away from our initial vantage point here for everybody's safety.
It had been 4 days since Samantha Stobbart was shot in the stomach and her boyfriend Christopher Brown was gunned down in cold blood by Raoul Moat. He'd blinded a policeman, said he intended to murder many more, and then threatened that innocent members of the public would be the next to die.
You're dealing with somebody who, in my view, was about as dangerous as a man can get.
Hundreds of armed officers from 18 police forces swamped the ground, while an RAF Tornado jet armed with specialist heat-seeking equipment circled in the air. But still, the police were unable to find the fugitive Raoul Moat.
soon as you approach Rothbury itself, it very much is rural. It's in the middle of the countryside. You've got woodlands on both sides, and it's very dense. And all of this you're looking at as potential places where someone could hide. So in terms of concealing yourself in those areas, it's very, very easy and very hard to find someone on the other side of the coin.
And as the days dragged on, fear began to poison the lives of ordinary people in Rothbury.
Stay indoors, not to let you alarm. The police are here to protect you.
The sight of armed police on these streets has been disconcerting for many. The warning from senior officers has been extremely disturbing.
But local people held firm.
They were remarkable. Let's not forget, had that developed into a sense of panic, then I think there's a real danger that we end up having to deal with that more than dealing with finding Moat. And because of the resolve that they showed, we were able to focus on the job in hand.
At times it was a close-run thing. A man matching Moat's description was reported approaching one of Rothbury's schools.
It's every parent's nightmare, and it sends a shiver right through you. We had the armed officers there. They were sent immediately to the school with directions to stand between the school and the threat. If he'd have been sighted, there is no way we'd have allowed him to get to that school. Absolutely none whatsoever. He'd have been stopped. If I had been required to take decisions to protect the public that would result in the loss of his life, I'd have taken them within a blink of an eye.
It could easily have developed to a potential Dunblane situation. At the beginning of the week, Moat had seemed controlled and targeted, but this was a man who had been on the loose now for days, not sleeping properly, not eating properly, and there was a concern that he'd become even more disturbed and anything could have happened.
For the family of Moat's murder victim, Christopher Brown, the police manhunt had an added level of intensity.
The police would phone me every day, 2, 3, 4 times a day, let me know what's going on. I wanted to know everything.
We were really angry in that week. We just wanted him, like I think most of the people wanted him caught, whether it be dead or alive.
Given the difficult terrain, the police called in some very specialist help. Expert tracker Ray Mears.
We developed a tactic to get him safely into the woods, to be protected, to allow him to do his work. There was a definite track picked up, and he tracked for some considerable way inside the woods. I do feel, and speaking to Ray, that we were very close. We were very close with that track to where Raoul Moat was in those woods. And there's no doubt in my mind, I do feel that played a part in Raoul Moat coming out of the woods a few hours later.
And so, 7 days after the killing of Christopher Brown and the maiming of Samantha Stobbart, the endgame began. It was 7 p.m. on a pleasant summer's evening, and Raoul Moat calmly strolled into Rothbury, carrying his shotgun.
Keep moving, please, folks, for your own safety.
One resident was worried that her mother might be in danger.
There's woods just behind hers, behind where the man is, and there's marksmen all over, and she's absolutely terrified. She's in tears, and I can't get her out.
4 armed police officers jumped out the car, and he had the gun in his hand, and they asked him to drop his weapon, and he refused, and then he put the gun to his head. He was stood there with the gun to his head.
Within minutes, Moat was on the ground, his shotgun pointed at his own head. A standoff had begun, and over 6 long hours was to be broadcast around the world.
We're now being moved back. The cordon's being moved away from our initial vantage point here for everybody's safety. Police reinforcements have clearly arrived. There's a lot of concern going on here.
Despite fortune seemingly having been against the police up until this point, this is just what they had planned for. Moat was surrounded by armed officers, and police negotiators could begin a conversation.
Their role is to try and bring the attention of Moat away from his current predicament and try and give him some sort of a lifeline. Try and convince him that there actually is something worth living for, something other than the course of action which he clearly had in his mind.
Friends and family of Moat offered themselves as potential go-betweens.
I thought that if there was any chance of him putting that gun down, I thought maybe somebody who cared about Raoul, rather than just the police force, might have had a better chance of getting him to do that. I didn't want him to die. That was the last thing on earth I wanted. You know, there'd been enough bloodshed already.
Moat told the negotiators he had never had a dad, but his real father, whom he had never met, made himself known to the police.
When he said to the negotiator, "I have no dad and nobody cares about me," that was the moment to say, well, actually, you do have a dad. Your dad's been very concerned about you all week. A man in that position who's always in his life wanted to talk to his father. He knows he's perhaps moments from death. He would have wanted to believe I was his father. I would have been pushing on an open door.
There was a number of people, be they associates, be the family, be the friends, every one of them was considered and risk assessed. And the decision was made that it wasn't appropriate, it was too dangerous. Any one of them could have given him his opportunity to effectively cleanse his conscience and then take his own life. So it had to be very, very carefully managed.
Of course, the only person Raoul Moat said he wanted to speak to was Samantha Stobbart, the ex-partner he'd put into intensive care.
For me, she would have been the last person, because she was the reason that he had started this whole episode. And it could have been the reason for him to finish his life. For me, that would have been way, way too risky. Risky for her and risky for the whole situation.
There are no rules that say we cannot use third parties in negotiation. It's not that we rule it out. I'd far rather rely upon trained, highly trained, experienced negotiators to actually do their job professionally, which is what we did.
At 10:30 that evening, the standoff looked like turning into a farce when former Newcastle and England footballer Paul Gascoigne arrived on the scene.
Paul, good evening. You're live on Real Radio. I just wonder, tell us about Raoul Moat, the Raoul Moat you know.
Raoul Moat, I knew him years ago. He used to be a bouncer at Newcastle. He was like a gentleman.
From somewhere he got this idea that he was the one who could bring a peaceful end to the Raoul Moat siege. So he armed himself with some cans of lager, he armed himself with a fishing rod, a loaf of bread and some roast chicken. He rang a taxi and he headed up to Rothbury.
But I told him he will not shoot me.
Well, it's a dangerous situation though, Gaza, isn't it?
I'm not scared of it, yeah. Hey, listen, I've just been in a car crash, hit a wall at 9 miles an hour. I survived that, I'm sure I can survive a bullet.
Paul Gascoigne now says he's unsure whether he did know Moat or not, and that the whole episode was a daft thing he did while emotionally unwell.
Wish Moody well, he'd be alright.
Conscious that the eyes of the world were upon their force, Northumbria Police Command thought hard about how to deliver the best possible outcome, given the armed standoff now in place.
I did not want to have a plan that only had one outcome, which was that we kill him.
Police knew Moat had made suicide threats in the past, and days earlier, when they'd raided his abandoned house, they'd found what they believed to be a hangman's noose, and no less than 6 suicide notes, written to social services and friends. And one to Samantha Stobbart, which read, "Sam, I can't go on without you. I love you so much, and miss you very, very much. Maybe now you'll see just how much."
Given the events that happened after he was released from prison, I think there's a fair assumption there that they were written in and around the time before he went and shot Christopher and Samantha. So they suggested to us that he may be suicidal.
But the police were determined not to allow Moat to commit suicide by cop.
The simple fact of the matter is that I have a legal obligation, where possible, where practicable, where I can, to protect his life.
A key consideration was whether a new type of non-lethal taser shotgun, known as the X12, could be used to bring him in alive. However, the weapon is not approved by the British government.
I'm taking a risk. But I'm taking a risk in circumstances in which what is the alternative? We're going to use it as an alternative to firing a bullet. or to watching him fire a bullet into his own head. And it's in that sort of context that I authorised that as a weapon to be issued and deployed, and I have absolutely no regret about that whatsoever, because it just might have given us an opportunity to bring him in alive.
But the police seem to be battling against the odds.
His state of mind was clearly very disturbed by this stage. This was at the very end, and all along Moat had made it clear that he was never coming in alive. He was never going to end up in court and back in a prison cell. He was determined about that, and he told the negotiators a number of times, "This ends in this field tonight."
As the armed standoff went into its 6th hour, the rain began to fall in Rothbury. It must have seemed to Raoul Moat that now even the elements were against him. Raoul Moat lay cornered by the riverside in the Northumbrian village of Rothbury. One of the UK's biggest manhunts was finally over. Around 1 a.m, the rain started falling. Moat hadn't slept for more than a few hours during the past week. A fresh team of armed officers had just taken over watch to relieve their exhausted colleagues. It seemed to them that Moat's mood had darkened during conversations with the police negotiators. Suddenly, Moat moved his shotgun from under his chin to the side of his head.
At that very, very moment, it was the officer's belief, and I think the belief of every person who was there, that this is it. He's going to kill himself. Right at this very moment, he's going to kill himself. Now, what do? Do you stand and watch him do that, or do you try to do something that might have meant he could have faced justice and spent 45 or preferably the rest of his natural life behind bars?
Within split seconds of each other, 2 officers fired shotgun taser rounds at Moat.
In their minds, this was it, and I think they did absolutely the right thing.
But the rounds didn't incapacitate Moat. Officers saw him rock back slightly and return the shotgun to his head. Then he pulled the trigger.
Wait, there is shots fired.
Come to us live, no.
There's just been one single sound of gunfire followed by the shouts of men saying, "Get that gun down, get that gun down, get that gun down."
So, on a damp summer's night in Northumbria, Raoul Moat's troubled and violent life came to an end. He was taken to hospital, but pronounced dead on arrival.
My preferred outcome would have been a successfully negotiated surrender, and Raoul Moat sitting in the cells on the Saturday morning for my team to interview him with a view to charging him and with a view to bringing him to justice and standing in the Crown Court to account for the death of Christopher Brown and the shootings of David Rathband and Samantha Stobbart.
For the family of Christopher Brown, Raoul Moat's suicide seemed the proper outcome.
He's dead. He shot himself. And I must admit, as bad as it sounds, because I'm not a violent person, I literally screamed, "Hallelujah, thank God."
I think what happened was the best outcome for Raoul Moat. I don't think he deserves to even be breathing. He took my brother away from me, and he deserves to be dead.
But in a macabre twist, Raoul Moat's brutal snubbing of authority, in some people's eyes, moulded him into a hero. At Moat's funeral, among the mourners, was a woman who never knew him, but had travelled from the south of England with her 3 teenage sons just to pay her respects.
I absolutely love the man. I think he's great.
Don't worry about the message that sends to your sons, given the crimes that this man committed.
Not at all. No, not at all.
You think your sons should use Raoul as a role model?
Actually, yeah, I do.
To raise him as a legend is not the right way forward. He wasn't a legend, he was a disturbed man who was my brother and is now dead. What happened was a tragedy. There were no winners in that, and I really didn't think it was a cause for celebration in any quarters.
For Northumbria Police, the tough decisions they made were finally vindicated by an official inquiry.
He was a dangerous, callous, cowardly killer. Yes, it would have been nice to see him spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, but he is gone, and he did not have the opportunity to kill anybody else or harm any other members of the public or police officers, and that probably just draws a line under it for me. It's done, it's finished, and we move on.
But the family of Christopher Brown remain haunted by their loss.
I don't think we'll ever get justice for my brother. Moat's dead, the other two are in prison. It's never going to bring him back. Never. And that's the only Sorry.
I'm still expecting my son to phone me and tell me he's okay, even now. So life for me is just existing, basically. There's still that hole and that pain that you just can't get rid of. He shot himself, and I must admit, as bad as it sounds, because I'm not a violent person, I literally screamed hallelujah, thank God.
I think what happened was the best outcome for Raoul Moat. I don't think he deserves to even be breathing. He took my brother away from me, and he deserves to be dead.
Thank you for watching. Murder UK is a website dedicated to giving the facts about murders and serial killers within the UK. Please consider subscribing and press that bell icon to be notified when we update new videos. Thank you.